The first thing we're going to do is install Git for Windows. Git is a revision control system. As I mentioned in the last movie, it is ubiquitous. Everybody uses Git. So if you're just starting out and you're trying to figure out which revision control system you want to use, Git is, in my opinion, not the easiest one to use, but it is the one that everybody goes to. So you should definitely learn Git. And so that's what we'll stick with. We'll start off with Git. So I need to download this. So I'll click the download button. And while that's going, there is one other thing that I need that I forgot to put in my requirements slide in the last movie, and that is going to be Notepad++. Now, we can use any editor we want with Git, but it's going to default to something called Vi Improved, or the Vim editor, which is not very easy to use. Most people don't know how to use it, and if you don't know how to use it, it is not helpful. So you're finding yourself in a situation where you're in some sort of weird piece of software and you're not sure what to do. The number one asked question on Stack Overflow is, how do I get out of Vim? And it's usually written by someone who's in Windows. I think the only time you ever see that happen is if you commit a file and you forget to add a message to your commit. So let's install an easier editor. Let's go for notepad++.org. It's spelled out kebab case, so notepad-plus-plus.org. I'll put the link in the text below the video. And let's download this one. And we're going to go with the latest, which is apparently the Stand with Hong Kong edition. We don't get political here, but we do need the tool. So let's scroll down a little bit. The first one you see is 32 bits. Nobody's running 32 bits anymore. Pretty much everybody's running 64 bits. So I'll click the installer here and I'll run it. And I'm just going to step through all the defaults. I don't need anything special on this one. And we're done. I'll click run. I've got that checkbox. It's going to open so I can see it. And this is basically like what the name says. It's the Notepad Editor on steroids. It does quite a lot. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with this. In fact, you could use this to write your Python code if you wanted to. But it's a good text editor to have around just as sort of a secondary, lighter weight. You don't want to launch Visual Studio or something heavy every time you want to change a text file. So this is a good thing to have. Okay, so I'll get out of that and I'll switch back over to Git for Windows. And this is finished downloading. So I'm going to run this one. I'll select yes. The first thing I'm going to see is the license agreement. This is the GNU General Public License. You pretty much have to abide by it if you want to use the software. So let's click next. You need to select a location. Program Files Git is as good as any. You need to select the components that you want. I usually leave this alone. If you really want an icon on the desktop, there's an option for it up here at the top. But the rest of these are pretty much what I would use for my settings anyway. They're the most common ones. So we're going to have Windows Explorer integration, large file support, and some associations. I'll click next. This is asking me where in the start menu do I want to see my shortcuts. That, again, is as good a place as any, so I'll click next. The next one is what I was alluding to earlier. By default, it's going to use the Vi Improved or the Vim editor. It is really hard to use if you don't already know how to use it. So let's switch to Notepad++, which we just installed. We'll click next. And your next choice, there are 3 of them. Use Git from Git Bash only, use Git from the command line and also from third-party software. That's the one we want because we're going to be using PyCharm or some other IDE later. Regardless of which one you choose, you want that third-party integration. Visual Studio Code has a Git client built into it, so does PyCharm. So that's a good thing to leave checked. And then down at the bottom, use Git and optional Unix tools from the command prompt. So all this is really doing is it's manipulating your path. I'm just going to leave it on the second one because that usually works fine for me. Next, you need to pick your SSL library. I'm just going to go with the basics here that's already selected. On the next screen, it's asking us, what do we want to do with line feeds? You may be aware of this, but Windows uses a different character. It's actually 2 characters to denote a new line in a text file. On Windows, it's a carriage return, CR, and then a line feed character, LF. So it's 2 characters. CR/LF is how we refer to it. But everybody else, Mac, Linux, Unix, everybody else pretty much uses just line feeds by themselves. There's no carriage return in there. So if you're working with code that switches between a Windows machine and a Linux machine, maybe if one of your colleagues is using a Mac, it's asking us, what do we want to do about line feeds that don't match what Windows expects? And generally, we can just keep this first one. A lot of shops just use Windows for development, and then maybe they use Linux in production, but they aren't doing development on Linux, and so the CR/LF thing isn't a problem. So I'm just going to go with the default. It converts them to what Windows expects them to be. The next screen is asking us what terminal emulator we want to use. I'm just going to stick with the default, MinTTY. Next, we need to choose the default behavior of git pull. If you're not a Git maven yet, you will be pretty soon, but I'm just going to stick with the default here. Fast forward or merge. Extra options, I just leave these as they are. Enable experimental support for pseudo consoles. Anything with the word experimental in it, to me, is a bad idea. I'm writing production code. I don't need experimental stuff on my development machine, so I'm going to click install. And finally, after the longest install questionnaire ever, I get to actually install it. While that's running, I'm going to get rid of some of the junk that's in my start menu. I probably should just uninstall this stuff. Not going to be using Spotify. Naturally, if you want to keep any of this, you can. It's not like you have to do this. And I'm pretty much going to be left with nothing but Microsoft Edge. In the real world, you'd probably want Office installed, but I'm not going to use it on this computer. Okay, so this should be finished now, the Git installer. We can launch it. We can view the release notes. I don't need to see the release notes. I'll just click Next and shut that down. And I should be able to see up here on recently added Git GUI, Git CMD, and Git Bash. Git Bash is the one that I use all the time, so I'm going to pin that one to the start. And I'll go ahead and name my group Code Tools. And we are all set. So one down, several to go. Let's go ahead and run it just to make sure it works. I teach a lot, so the first thing I generally want to do, if you teach too, the first thing you want to do is go into Options and bump up the font size. But I will leave that up to you. I'm going to go ahead and bump mine up to something obnoxious like 16. And that just makes it a lot easier to read. If you really want to test it out, you can type git status, and it should tell you that the current folder is not a Git repository, which is accurate. It's not. So it seems like this is working. So I can close this down. In the next video, we'll take a look at installing the .NET build tools for C++. If you found value in this video, if you learned something new, help me out with a like and subscribe. For more videos on software development and DevOps from a developer's perspective, check us out at maddevskills.com or on Twitter @devskills.